Moshe Rabbeinu is giving the Yidden a bracha, and he says to them, Hashem Elokeinu v'yisechem Yosef aleichem kachem elef pa'amim. Hashem should bless you. Hashem should increase you, should multiply you 1,000 times of how much you are today. V'yivarech eschem kasher diber lachem, and bless you as he had spoken to you. Rashi quotes the words Yosef aleichem kachem elef pa'amim. Hashem should increase you and multiply you 1,000-fold, and explains, Mahu shu v'yivarech eschem kasher diber lachem. Once Moshe Rabbeinu said already, they're going to be 1,000 times as much as they are now. What is being added to the words? V'yivarech eschem, that Hashem should bless you as he told you. Because what happened over here was that the Yidden said to Moshe, you're putting a certain limit onto our brachos. Hashem had already promised Avraham, if anyone be able to count the Yidden. In other words, that there's no number. And you're telling us now 1,000 times. So Moshe Rabbeinu responds and says, Zumi shalihi, this is my bracha. But the continuation of the pasuk means, but Hashem will bless you as he spoke to you. Now the source for this, Rashi says the Rebbe is in the Sifri and in the Medrash. In the Sifri it says, Amru loy, the Yidden said, Rabbeinu Moshe, our Rebbe Moshe, efshi, we don't want that you should bless us. Hashem promised Avraham Avinu already and said, V'yerbesi ezarach, that I'm going to increase your children, kechoich v'yashamayim, like the stars of the heaven. V'samti ezarach, I'm going to make your children kafar oretz, like the dust of the earth. And you are putting a limit onto our brachos. The Medrash then goes on and mentions a mashal, which we will mention later in the Sicha. And then it goes on and says that Moshe Rabbeinu said to the Yidden, Hashem Elokeinu v'yisechem Yosef aleichem kachem elef pa'amim. When I said that Hashem should make you 1,000 times as much, that was my bracha. However, v'yivarich eschem kasher diber lachem, but of course Hashem is going to bless you as he spoke to you, like the sands of the seas, like the plants of the earth, like the fish in the sea, like the stars of the heavens. Very similarly, the Medrash also says, the above was the Sifri, the Medrash also says something very similar, that the Yidden said to Rabbeinu Moshe, the Eibishter didn't give a limit to our brachos, and you're saying elef pamim 1,000 times. And again, Moshe Rabbeinu says, this bracha that I gave you is mine, and when the Eibishter will come, he will give you the bracha that he had promised you. Now the Rebbe says, as we learned the simple meaning in Rashi, as well as the Sifri and the Medrash, simply the argument of the Yidden is that the bracha of Hashem is completely without any limit whatsoever, that the Yidden are going to be actually, in a way of bli gvul, completely unlimited, infinite. And why is Moshe Rabbeinu giving them a bracha 1,000 times as much as they are right now, which clearly has a certain limitation? However, if that's the pshat, says the Rebbe, there's a number of things that are not understood. Number one, why is Rashi starting with a question on the pasuk? That why does it say, after saying elef pa'amim, what's the point of saying v'yivarich eschem kasher diber lachem? Why doesn't Rashi just straight out start off with the argument that the Yidden have to Moshe, the question that the Yidden have to Moshe? As the Sifri and the Medrash put it exactly that way, that the Yidden have an argument to Moshe Rabbeinu. Especially that we know that Rashi is not a style usually to start explaining what's the problem in the pasuk. Rather, he immediately just explains what the pasuk is trying to say, as discussed many times. Point number 2. Even if there wouldn't be this question in the pasuk of why does it say now v'yivarich eschem kasher diber lachem, we would still have a problem. Moshe Rabbeinu would still have to explain, and Rashi would have to explain that bracha is only Moshe Rabbeinu's, so that it shouldn't be in contradiction to brachas that were already clearly said earlier by Hashem, that we Yidden won't be able to be counted, and so on and so forth. In other words, even without these words in the pasuk, the extra words v'yivarech eschem kasher diber lachem, we still have to explain what the elef pa'amim means. The next thing the Rebbe asks is, why is it that the pasuk that Rashi uses as the proof that the Yidden are complaining to Hashem, to Moshe Rabbeinu, and using the pasuk that Hashem said, Asherim yuchalim ish limnois, that no one will be able to count the Yidden? Why doesn't he bring the proof from the Sifri, which is from the earlier part of that same pasuk, the earlier part of that promise? The pasuk says, "V'samti ezaracha ka'afar ha'oretz," I will make your children as the dust of the earth. In addition to the other pasuk that the Sifri brings, "V'yerbesi ezaracha kechech v'yashamayim." So why is it that Rashi is bringing the later part of that pasuk, which is Asherim yuchal ish limnois, which if anyone will be able to count the dust, so too your children won't be able to be counted. And finally, the Rebbe asks, since Rashi is just coming to explain what's this business of having 1,000 times, which is a certain limit, as opposed to the unlimited amount, why is Rashi quoting from the pasuk also the words Yosef Aleichem Kachem instead of just quoting the words Elef Pamim? The Rebbe says we also need to understand, and this is a very, very, even in a bigger question, a most important question, as the Mefarshim ask. What exactly is even Moshe Rabbeinu's bracha adding to the bracha of Hashem? Moshe Rabbeinu is saying 1,000 times. If the bracha of Hashem is an unlimited bracha, then 1,000 times is completely nothing. It's completely nullified. It's completely irrelevant compared to the bracha that Hashem already gave. We know there's a famous klal. The Gemara uses the expression, Yesh b'chlal mosayim, mana included in 200 is certainly 100. Once you have the bracha of bli gvul, what is even the point of saying that the Yidden will be 1,000 times as they are right now? So Mefarshim answer this question in two ways. Either that the Eibishter's bracha is a conditional bracha, that means if the Yidden are going to be Mekayim Torah and mitzvahs, then they're going to be bli gvul. But Moshe Rabbeinu is giving a bracha for being 1,000 times, regardless and independent of any conditions. Another explanation is that Moshe Rabbeinu's bracha applies these days, and the Eibishter's bracha will be fulfilled la'asid lavai. Says the Rebbe, these answers could fit very well in the Sifri and the Medrash, as the Rebbe is about to explain, but he's going to say that Lefi Rashi, this is going to be a problematic answer, and that is, the Medrash brings a mashal over there, which we started mentioning before. The Medrash brings a mashal of a king that had a lot of possessions. He has a little child. The king needs to go now overseas. He needs to go out of the country. And he's concerned. He says, if I'm going to leave all my money, all my possessions with my child, he's going to go and waste them. So the king goes ahead and appoints a caretaker until the child will grow up. Now, finally, the child grows up, and he clearly wants what the king has given him, etc., and the apotrupos, the caretaker, tells him the following: whatever I was giving you till now, the last number of years and so on, all of that I was just giving you of my own personal possessions. What your father had left for you, that's still being safeguarded, etc. What do we see from here? In other words, it's two separate times. There's one time when the caretaker was taking care of the child and giving him a certain amount, and then later he'll go and get much more from the king. In a similar way over here, we could say that the bracha of Hashem is not in the same time or in the same situation, under the same conditions, when the bracha that Moshe Rabbeinu is in this case, like the caretaker, that bracha applies. So too, this was the Sifri. The Medrash also gives a similar sort of mashal, where the king also asked someone to distribute a certain amount of money, and he distributed less, and then he said what I was giving was only my own. The king will come, and he will give what he promised. So again, it's in two separate times. So therefore, we could say that one is referring to when Yidden are doing what they're supposed to. The other one is when the Yidden are not, when they're not doing what they're supposed to. Or, as we said, either now in La'asid Lavoi. So that would fit. But in Rashi is explaining Pshuta Shel Mikra, and all Rashi says is that Moshe says, this is my bracha, and Hashem will give you what he promised you. He doesn't hint at all to any of these explanations that we just said, that it seems to be either under different conditions or in different times. So it's understood that there must be a very simple explanation, according to Rashi, which Rashi doesn't even have to explain or even hint to. Says the Rebbe, the explanation is as follows. According to Pshuta Shel Mikra, and in truth, even according to the way of learning of Sifri and the Medrash, there's really no question why Moshe Rabbeinu is limiting, so to speak, the bracha by saying Elef Pamim 1,000 times, while Hashem seemingly gave a bracha without any limit, without any number whatsoever. Because after all, a person, a human being, no matter how great he is, he's still a nivra mugbul, a limited and finite creature. And therefore the point being is, in other words, there can't come something bli gvul from him. The Rebbe points out to something that's discussed in Sifrei Chakira and more philosophy type of Sfarim, how from something limited, something finite, you'll never be able to get, even from many, many, many finite things, you'll never get to something that's truly infinite. The example that Rebbe gives over here is from the continuation of time itself, that it cannot be going on forever and ever and ever without a limit. Because since time itself is made up of minutes, hours, days, etc., so then you'll have to say, if we would say that it goes on in an unlimited way, is it possible to say that one bli gvul, one infinite thing is greater than another infinite thing? Meaning to say, you have, if time was unlimited, you would say you have infinite hours, but 1 second, every hour has many minutes. So does that mean there's even more infinite minutes than hours? So therefore the Rebbe says, you can't really have this concept of one bligvul being greater than another bligvul, which leads us also to the conclusion that from gvul, from something limited and finite, we'll never really get to bligvul. The Rebbe says he's not getting into all of that right now, but the point again being is that the bracha coming right now from Moshe Rabbeinu certainly couldn't be a bligvul bracha, and that's why he's giving a bracha with a certain limit, with a certain cap. Now furthermore, the Rebbe says, generally we understand both in the Sifri and the Medrash, and of course, as we'll soon see in Rashi, we're not actually speaking about that the Eibishter gave a bracha that's actually literally bligvul. Rather, what the Eibishter is giving a bracha is a very, very tremendous number. The Eibishter says, I'm going to increase your children, like the stars of the heaven, like the dust of the earth, and not mentioning a certain number. In other words, that they're going to be so many, such a tremendous amount that it's very, very difficult, almost impossible to count. And the Rebbe says, just like choil hayam, just like the sand by the sea, which is what the Eibishter says to Avraham Avinu, kachoil asher al sfas hayam, and then he concludes, the Sifri itself uses this term, kachoil hayam. So we understand that the sand at the sea definitely has a number, it's a finite amount, but it's such a tremendous amount that you don't count it. As the pasuk says, asher lo yisofer meiroiv, just can't be counted because there are so many. So we're not speaking about true bligvul. The Rebbe brings a proof from another pasuk by Yosef, where it speaks about Yosef gathering all the grain, all the food from the 7 years of plenty for the years of famine. And the pasuk says that he gathered by Yitzbar Yosef bor kechoil hayom, like the sand of the sea, at ki choda lispor, till it stopped being counted, ki ein mispor, because there's no number. Now we understand if you're gathering the food from the 7 years that Yosef gathers, and he puts into a specific place in a specific city, obviously it's a certain limit to the amount of food that he gathered, and the amount of grain that he gathered. But it's such a tremendous amount that's why, as the pasuk says, Chodal Lispor, as Rashi explains, that the person counting, stopped counting, he ain't mispar. In other words, there's no numbers amongst those numbers that we usually use, it's just beyond counting. Says the Rebbe, according to the Sifri and the Medrash, this is what the Yidden are arguing to Moshe. Elef Pa'amim is putting a certain limit, meaning to say, not that before it was unlimited and now it's limited, but rather the number of Elef Pa'amim is going to be a smaller number than what the Eibishter said, that it's not going to be counted at all. Because at the end of the day, Elef Pa'amim is a number, 1,000 you could count. That's the Sifri in the Medrash. The Rebbe says in Pshutei Shel Mikra, this is not even really such a question. Rashi is not bothered by that question. According to Pshutei Shel Mikra, the Yidden wouldn't have had this question. Why? Because even Elef Pa'amim, even 1,000 times of what they were at the time, is also this most tremendous number, as we will soon discuss. And therefore Rashi doesn't start, as a Sifri in the Medrash, with that question, that how is Moshe Rabbeinu saying Elef Pa'amim if they were already promised so much more than that? Rather, what's Rashi saying? What's the problem? Because the pasuk goes on and says, after Moshe Rabbeinu says Elef Pa'amim, he then clearly goes ahead and says, Vivorich eschem kasher diber lochem, that Hashem will bless you as He spoke to you. That obviously tells us there must have been some sort of conversation. There must have been some problem with what Moshe Rabbeinu said in the Yidden's eyes, and that's why he now has to tell them another thing, Vivorich eschem kasher diber lochem, as we will discuss. So first of all, we just said that even Elef Pa'amim is this most tremendous amount. How much are we speaking about? So the Rebbe says, well, you know that the Yidden at that time were 600,000 Yidden, this is men, between the ages of 20 and 60. In addition to that, of course, we have all the men that are under the age of 20. We have those that are over the age of 60. We have women, we have children. According to the calculation, it should be the Yidden are at least 2 million people at the time. If Moshe Rabbeinu is giving them a bracha of being 1,000 times as much, well, that is 2 billion people. In Pshutei Shel Mikra, says the Rebbe, it doesn't make sense to say that the Yidden are arguing, oh, how come we are only going to be 2 billion people? Because again, remember we said that even when the Eibishter promises Kechoich ve'ashamayim, or they won't be counted, etc., we established already also that it's not going to be bli gvul, as we will soon discuss as well. So therefore, it just means a tremendous amount, and Moshe Rabbeinu is also giving them a big amount, 2 billion people. Furthermore, the Rebbe says it might even be more than 2 billion. Why? Because when we say Elef Pa'amim 1,000 times, it doesn't necessarily mean exactly 1,000 either. When you say you're going to be 1,000 times as much, it means many, many times as much as you are right now. It could even be more than 1,000. And that's simply the way you could understand Moshe Rabbeinu's words. He's not necessarily limiting it to exactly 1,000 times. Says the Rebbe, let's have a look at how many Yidden there could even possibly be on the face of earth. It's not going to be as many as stars and the dust of the earth and the sand of the sea. Because after all, the space, the amount of space on earth, it's a limited and a finite space. Chazal say, Shita alpha parsi alva alma, that the earth is 6,000 parsois. A person takes up a certain amount of space. Chazal tell us, Dalad Amos is the space of a person. So you could go ahead and try to figure out how many people could possibly even fit on the face of earth. Especially taking into consideration that besides the Yidden, there are also, and this is true even L'Asad Lavoi, there are also other nations, there are animals, there are houses, there are fields, there are vineyards, and so on and so forth. Furthermore, the Rebbe says, Yidden aren't spread out all over the whole world. Yidden, in their rightful place, according to Torah, are in Eretz Yisrael, which is again a smaller place, even in the whole earth, compared to the whole earth. Now, even though it says, the Gemara says Eretz Yisrael is called Eretz Atzvi, compared to a deer, which means that when there's more Yidden in Eretz Yisrael expands, but it's still only a small portion compared to the whole earth. So it's understood that no matter how many people that could be on the whole earth, obviously it's a much smaller amount that's going to be the Yidden in Eretz Yisrael, and that this is clearly a much smaller amount than the amount of dust on the earth, dust of the earth and the sand by the sea, especially if you want to count all of that together. So therefore, when Moshe Rabbeinu says, Yosef aleichem kachem elef pa'amim, that you should be 1,000-fold, which we said is at least 2 billion people, is not in contradiction to the bracha of Hashem, because even the bracha of Hashem was only used as a borrowed term, not literally meaning kechoich ve'ashamayim, like actually the stars of the heaven and the dust of the earth and the sand by the sea. So that is, when Hashem says kechoich ve'ashamayim, it just means a tremendous, tremendous amount. And when Moshe Rabbeinu says elef pa'amim, it's, as we said, 1,000 times 600,000, which is 2 billion. If we counted the Yidden were more than 600,000, there was a 2 million, as we said before. And furthermore, we said elef pa'amim could also be a borrowed term, which can mean even more than 2 billion. So after all, not necessarily Moshe Rabbeinu is saying anything different to what Hashem promised. So that wouldn't have been a problem. And that's why Rashi doesn't start off with that question. How is Moshe Rabbeinu giving such a bracha? But again, since it says, V'yivarech eschem kasher dibur lachem, since Moshe Rabbeinu now continues, and Hashem should give you a bracha like he spoke to you, it's obvious that Moshe Rabbeinu needed to answer this in some sort of response to the argument and the question of the Yidden. And this is why Rashi says the Yidden did have a complaint. Moshe, you're giving a limit to our bracha when Hashem promised Avraham Avinu that people, we won't be able to be counted. So let's explain what's going on over here. On the pasuk Asherim Yuchal Lishlimnis, if someone will be able to count the Yidden, Rashi says, just like it's impossible for the dust to be counted, so too your children won't be counted. In other words, that the bracha of Hashem was not that the Yidden should actually be exactly like the dust of the earth in the amount, but rather that because of such a tremendous amount that the Yidden are, they won't be able to be counted, just like you don't count the dust. And this is what the Yidden are saying to Moshe Rabbeinu. Why are you putting a certain limit, a certain cap on the brachos? That is, since Hashem promised that it's going to be such a tremendous amount, that it's completely not usual, it's uncommon to count it, Zarach Lo Yimona, why are you, Moshe Rabbeinu, speaking in numbers, elef pa'amim, that they are going to be counted? And again, even though elef pa'amim could just mean such a tremendous amount, as we said earlier, that it might be much more than elef pa'amim as well. It might be more than the 2 billion, but at the end of the day, it's still some sort of number that are going to be counted and measured according to what they are right now. You're right now a certain amount, and you're going to be 1,000 times as much. And the Rebbe explains this is the difference between the Sifri and the Medrash versus Rashi. According to the Sifri and the Medrash, the argument of Moshe Rabbeinu was, when Sifri and Medrash say you gave a limit to our brachos, is that Moshe Rabbeinu is actually limiting the bracha, giving them a much smaller bracha, a much smaller amount than what the Eibishter promised. Because the Eibishter promised, Kechoich ve'ashamayim and ka'afar ha'aretz, we said those were the psukim that the Sifri and the Medrash bring, Kechoich ve'ashamayim, the stars of the heaven and afar ha'aretz. And in fact, says the Rebbe, this is why the Sifri brings first the pasuk Yechoich V'Shamayim, which is actually a later pasuk in Torah, and then Kafar Oretz, because it's coming to explain when the pasuk says V'samti ezaracha Kafar Oretz, that won't be able to be counted, we actually mean, in other words, the tremendous amount, similar to Koich V'Shamayim, in an unbelievable great amount. So according to the Sifri and the Medrash, the Eibishter promises Kechoich V'Shamayim and Kafar Oretz, which is just this unbelievable great tremendous number, and Moshe Rabbeinu is giving a smaller number, which is Elef Pa'amim, which, as we said before, let's say it's around 2 billion people. According to Rashi, the argument is something else. At the Nois and Kitzvah L'Berchaseinu, we're not speaking about that. They're necessarily saying you're giving us a smaller number than the number Hashem gave us. What they're saying is Hashem said that it's not going to be within the realm of counting. Why are you, Moshe Rabbeinu, putting it suddenly within words of numbers? And this is why Rashi is bringing the pasuk not Kechoich V'Shamayim Kechol Hayom, which again ultimately has some sort of finite number as well, but rather he brings the pasuk Asher im Yuchal Ish Limnois, etc. If anyone will be able to count them, as said before. So just to clarify, in the best of my understanding of what the Rebbe is saying over here, the difference between the Sifri Medrash versus Rashi. The Sifri, according to the Sifri, yes, it's true, both are finite numbers. As we said before, even the Eibishter's bracha is also a finite number. We're not speaking about unlimited in the literal sense. But still, when we speak about things like Koich V'Shamayim, Afar Oretz, we understand that these are just such unbelievable, wild, crazy numbers that we don't even speak about those numbers at all. Moshe Rabbeinu is giving already a smaller number, Elef Pa'amim, 1,000 times what they are right now, which is 2 billion people. Nothing compared close to the amount of stars, etc., which are much, 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 much more, even though also still limited. According to Rashi, as well, the Rebbe's point is, as my understanding is, and it'll be even more clear in the further part of the Sicha, is not necessarily that Moshe Rabbeinu is giving them less than Hashem. Because Hashem, when he said that you won't be able to count them, already also means a finite number, it's just such a high number we don't usually count. And Moshe Rabbeinu is giving a pretty good number, also 2 billion people. And the argument of the Yidden is more like, why are we even speaking about numbers? You're suddenly putting it in the framework of numbers, even though technically it might not be a smaller bracha than Hashem's bracha in numbers. Says the Rebbe further. This is what Moshe Rabbeinu answers. What does that mean? The bracha that I gave you, Yosef Hashem Aleichem Kachem Alef, that Hashem should make you 1,000-fold, is the same bracha that Hashem is giving you. In other words, I'm giving you the same bracha. It's just that the way it comes through Moshe Rabbeinu, and the way it's being said through Moshe Rabbeinu, is being said through a certain gvul, through a certain limit, through a certain finite measure. But of course, Hashem is going to bench you as He said to you. In other words, the bracha is going to be fulfilled what Hashem said to you, Kasher Dibur Lachem, and which is that really it's going to be beyond being able to count, really. So what's the pshat? It's within the words of Yosef Aleichem Kachem we can understand what's happening. Moshe Rabbeinu, since he's a limited person, a finite person, in a certain time, in a certain place, so he sort of cannot remove himself completely from the concept of gevul, from the concept of limitation. And therefore, he looks at the Yidden as a certain amount what they are right now, and he benches them. He says, whatever you are right now, you should be 1,000 times as much. But the bracha of the Eibishter, since Hashem is of course not limited, so therefore when he promises Avraham Avinu, Asherim Yuchal Ish Limnois, will the Yidden won't be able to be counted. Just like the sand cannot be counted. In other words, Hashem is seeing the Yidden in their state of beyond numbers. So again, the bracha is technically the same bracha, but Moshe Rabbeinu is saying I needed to express it through a certain limited medium. The Rebbe says an example to this, although not exactly the same, is we know regarding the Aseres HaDibros. Hashem says to the Yidden, the Aseres HaDibros, it all comes out but Dibur Echad, because Hashem is not limited, the 10 things could all come out together. Those very same Aseres HaDibros, how do they come to the Yidden? The Yidden hear them as 10 individual things. So too over here. Moshe Rabbeinu was saying that Hashem's bracha is of course going to come to you. It's only because it's coming through me, it came out in this number in a specific way. The Rebbe moves on now to Yeina Shel Torah in Rashi. The Rebbe says it's explained in Kisvei Arizal, The Arizal's yard side is, of course, Hey Menachem and that Kviyiso is that Motzei Shabbos. Regarding this statement that Moshe Rabbeinu says that up until here it's my bracha, but the Eibishter is going to give you what he promised you. So it says in Kisvei Arizal the following: Moshe has the same gematria as the name Keil Shin Daled Yud, both of them equaling 345. Now, when you write out the names Keil Shin Daled Yud completely, meaning that Keil is spelled out, not only Aleph Lamed, which then it would only be 31, but if you spell it out, the Aleph is Aleph Lamed Fei. The Lamed is spelled out Lamed Mem Daled. And so to the Shin, the Daled, and the Yud. That would all equal 999. Together with that which is known often in Gematria, you have something called a koilel. That means all of it also put together is one more. That equals 1,000. And he explains in Kisvei Arizal over there that this Elef, this 1,000, or also sometimes Aleph, as we know, Aleph is the word Aleph, or the letter Aleph, sometimes is also understood as being related to this word Elef of 1,000, is the Aleph of Bina, of the level of Bina. This is based on a Gemara which speaks actually about the letters of the Aleph Beis, and the Gemara says Aleph Bina. Now, Moshe Rabbeinu's power was to bless up until the level of Ima, of Bina. And therefore, what does Moshe Rabbeinu say? Elef Pa'amim. And that's what Moshe Rabbeinu says. Till here, that's my bracha. From here onwards, you'll get the bracha from Aboilah, the level of Chachma. Says the Rebbe, here we're going to see how Pshutei Shel Mikra goes so well together with the idea of Pnimiyas HaTorah. And the Rebbe explains. First, the Rebbe is going to explain how it works based on the Medrash and Sifri. But then the Rebbe is going to explain the Pirush again according to Rashi and see how Rashi's Pirush is the one that fits very much with what we just said from the Arizal. So the Rebbe says like this. According to the Sifri and Medrash, we said already that the fact that Yidden are being blessed in this unlimited way, we don't mean actually completely unlimited, it's a borrowed term. But even when we say it's a borrowed term, but since it's something that says in Torah Emes, it's Inyan Amiti, that means to say that Yidden are going to be like the stars of the heaven, like the sand of the sea, the sand of the earth, the sand of the sea, such a tremendous amount that lo yisafar miroiv, that it completely cannot be counted. That's because in the shoirish, where it's really coming from a place from true bli gvul. But as it comes down into the world is a finite and a mugbulika place, so therefore we just say it cannot be counted because of so many, but not that it's actually bli gvul. In other words, there's two aspects to the bli gvul. There's the bli gvul the way it's mulmaila, and then there's the bli gvul the way it's translated in the world. In other words, the fact that Yidden are kechoich ve'ashamayim and kafar haaretz and kechoil hayom is only because once you're coming down into the olam ois already, into olam hazeh, so therefore it's going to have to be limited in a certain way. But be'emes and ba'amitis and be'pnimis, the way it's lamaila, they are truly, completely bli gvul. So, according to the Medrash, again, it would be that there is that level of true, absolute bli gvul, which the Eibishter was giving them. And then there's the next level, as it's coming down through Moshe Rabbeinu, which has some sort of Hagbala already. In other words, according to the Sifri and the Medrash, the tremendous amount of Koich ve'ashamayim kafar haaretz kechoil hayom, which cannot be counted, is coming from the true bli gvul l'mayla, those oilam is ein soif, that are even higher than Atzilus. And then when it moves down into the worlds, which is what Moshe Rabbeinu is saying, in other words, giving them a certain number, this is already because in the language of people, we have the concept of number, in other words, that we also can relate to in some sort of way, and that's going to be already within the world of Atzilus, the 10 spheres, etc. Fine, that's all the Medrash and the Sifri. Now we're going to look at the way it's according to Rashi, and that is, even the way the Yidden are not on such a tremendously amazingly a high number like Yechoich ve'ashamayim. As we said before, that even Hashem's bracha is also somewhat similar to Moshe Rabbeinu's bracha. It's just Hashem's bracha was expressed in a way of not saying numbers. Moshe Rabbeinu's bracha was expressed in saying numbers, but technically not necessarily they're that different. So there isn't such a massive difference and bli gvul by the Eibishter's bracha. Nevertheless, there's still a difference between Moshe Rabbeinu's bracha and Hashem's bracha, that in Moshe Rabbeinu's bracha, there's still some number, some limitation being felt, or the way the Eibishter expressed it is that your children will not be able to be counted like the dust of the earth. In other words, we don't really feel that limitation at all. Says the Rebbe, since everything has a shayrish l'mayla, it's understood that both of these levels l'mayla, in other words, the way Hashem expressed it, which is beyond number, but still really ultimately finite in a certain way, but it's still the numbers aren't felt, or the way Moshe Rabbeinu expresses it through a certain number, is all coming from a level where there is already the concept of Kalim, there is already the concept of a certain limitation on the earth. This is in the world of Atzilus, where there is certain division and limitation. And this is why it's going to come down into our world. It's also going to come down into practical numbers. The difference, as the Rebbe is about to explain, is again whether the numbers are felt or the numbers are not felt. Going back for a moment first to the Sifri and the Medrash. If we speak about like the Sifri and the Medrash, the Oyer, the way it's completely higher than the Kalim, in other words, a place where there's no Kalim at all, so that would come down Lamata. In a way, even down here, we say it's Bli Mispar with no number, according to at least how the world understands no number. And therefore, that would be like the Choich V'Hashamayim, Kafar Oretz, or Kochoy Layom. So again, according to the Medrash, there would be a much more Bligvul aspect being felt. However, according to Rashi, in both cases, they're much more finite. The difference only is, do you feel the number, as in Moshe's case, or according to Hashem, you don't even notice numbers at all. So this would be the difference between whether the Kalim are being felt, or the Kalim are not being felt at all. So in other words, the Bracha of Hashem, according to the Sifri and Medrash, are coming from a place of Keser where there's no Kalim at all. However, according to Rashi, the Bracha of the Eibishter is in the place of Chachma. Which is, as we said before, from the Arizal. It's in the place of Chachma, and therefore there are already Kalim. It's just not being felt. Regarding Chachma, we say that even the Kalim are similar to the Oiros. We know there's a concept called Iyu v'chayoy yichad, Hashem and his Oiros are one, and one of the meanings of that is that in the level of Chachma, even the Kalim are part of the Oir. The Kali is not being felt so much. So that's how it's coming from the Eibishter. On the other hand, the way it's coming from Moshe is already coming down, as we said, according to the Arizal, from the level of Bina, a place where there's much more limitation and number, and therefore you feel already the inyan of a Keli. So what do we see here? That Rashi's Pirush specifically would fit very much to what we said, Al Pi Pnimiyas HaTorah, according to the Arizal. The Rebbe concludes that through learning in Torah in both of these ways, both Pshat and generally Nigla the Torah, which is more like the limited or finite aspect in Torah, the numbered aspect in Torah, as well as learning Pnimiyas HaTorah, the Torah of the Arizal, which the Arizal said that in these generations specifically, it's a mitzvah and you're allowed to, it's a mitzvah to reveal this Chochmah. In these days, that's through Torah's Achsidus, and in a way of Yisparnus and Minei, that we have it already fully understood through Chassidus Chabad, and this is more the Ein Sof in Torah, higher than the level of number, and in a way that both of these aspects of Torah are a Torah Achas, will be Zoichet at the time when Vayim Misper B'nei Yisrael. The Yidden will be in a way Asher Lo Yimad V'Lo Yisofer, won't be able to be measured and be counted, will be L'Asid Lava Yibakariv Mamash.